Much. We are back. Stephen T. Katz is my guest from Boston University, Holocaust Studies professor. I'd like to bring things up to the present time. We talked about the background of what we differ, but what we individually believe led to the Holocaust. And I want to talk about the enduring elements that continue to, I don't want to say infect the minds, but it's still out there, not only in terms of anti-Jewish sentiment and how it manifests today in opposition to the existence of the State of Israel, but how it affects politics today. Obviously, the Nazis were completely defeated, thank God, in 1945. Communism was not defeated. They went on to conquer and occupy about a quarter of the surface of the planet. So they got to write some of the history. And we still have never, even though we've had a reckoning with what Nazism was because they were defeated, that's never happened with communism. It's still out there. So I don't think our society has really come to grips with what were the underlying philosophies there and how they were similar and how they affect us today, how they influence our thinking today.
I'm not sure completely. There's some truth to that, but you have to remember, with the fall of the Soviet Union and the liberation of Eastern Europe, you now have a liberal democratic country, though it's taken a right-wing turn in Poland, and you have a democratic turn in Romania, though these are all curious terms, because a lot of them have slid back into more unpleasant right-wing kind of politics. But there has been a reckoning. I mean, there's been a general discrediting of Marxism. I remember as a young man, Chuck, everybody on college campuses was reading all kinds of what I'd call communist literature, pro-left literature, left-wing intellectuals. They were all the rage. We all read
like George Lucas, right?
Well, I'm thinking of all kinds of books on Marxism.
Okay, we have a caller. Hello, you're with us. Hello. Come in, speak up. Okay, well, when you're ready to speak, go ahead.
So that's changed. You don't see people reading Marxist literature. You don't see, the place you see it, some of the professoriates still have a soft spot for kinds of economic analyses of literature or economic analyses of class. But by and large, I think history has made all of that rather passé.
Well, it has in terms of outright Marxism.
So that's what I mean.
But the residue of it continues to reside around the edges of the way people look at the world, and I think it manifests itself, quite frankly, in the anti-Israel attitude, in an anti-American attitude, in an anti-private ownership business attitude.
Well,
we have a caller. Hello.
Yes, Shalom Aleichem. I wanted to comment. You seem to equate taking exception to the justice or lack of justice with the state of Israel and the occupation of Palestine with being anti-Jewish or against the principles of the Old Testament, for example. But I don't believe that they are synonymous, one and the same. Some of the most Orthodox Jews in the past, before the creation of the state, and today, Hasidic Jews have mentioned that there are many aspects of that secular movement that started with Theodor Herzl that are not, that being for or against the state of Israel has nothing necessarily to do with being for the principles of the Old Testament. And within the state of Israel, there are many folks who take exception to the policies and the suffering that is caused to some of our sisters and brothers, and I'm talking about humanity, in Palestine. And also there are groups in the United States, another group known as Jewish Voices for Peace, who have every, in terms of rabbinical law and being born of a Jewish mother, also take great exception, and other folks who are on BNN from Jewish Voices of Peace take great exception to the policies which I believe are hurtful not only to Palestinians, but again, treat other people the way you want to be treated yourself. And so people in good conscience can be against those policies, but that doesn't mean that you're against the Old Testament or against myself, who was raised Jewish, and I'm very glad I was bar mitzvahed, and that's all great, but I take great exception, though, to many of the hurtful policies to folks who are trying to live in that area of the world. And so in the meantime, I look forward to hearing your response, and sei gesund.
Thank you very much. Steve, why don't you
Well, I
start?
just want to say this is totally different from our conversation about Nazism.
Right.
But the caller makes a mistake, I think. The fact of the matter is that Israel finds itself in an extremely difficult political position. The wars that have been the cause of all the violence over the last 60 years, more now, since 48, and even going back to 1929 violence in Hebron and before that, is not because the Jews are somehow malevolent and doing things that are malevolent. The fact of the matter is that you have a situation, a lot of it rooted in theology on both sides, a lot of it rooted in historical circumstance, in which you cannot find a median way, a moderate, mediating compromise. And it's not more than you would find anywhere else. And the Jews are not particularly ugly in that part of the world. The state of Israel is remarkably, quite remarkably benign when you consider that it houses a population and it faces every day people stabbing today, people in the streets of Jerusalem. There were, I think, 11,000 or 12,000 rockets sent from Gaza into the state of Israel over the last few years before the fighting last summer with Hamas. 11 or 12,000 rockets. Now, what country in the world would America tolerate 11,000 rockets coming from Toronto or Montreal? Would it tolerate 11,000 rockets coming from Mexico? Would any European country tolerate any of this kind of behavior? I see that Sweden, the most liberal country, or one of the most liberal countries on the planet, is now sending back 80,000 Syrian refugees after a very short experience because there were 1 or 2 killings. The state of Israel has constantly, for all these years, confronted an enemy devoted to its destruction. There are now millions of Jews living in the land of Israel. What will happen to those Jews? Will they all become second-class citizens again in a Muslim world? Will Hamas treat them with humanity? Will the Palestinian Authority treat them as equal citizens? So I'm afraid it's very nice, and I share your sympathy. I also would always like to be on the right side and never have violence. I would also like to have a situation where no Jew ever causes harm to anyone. But in a situation of suicidal madness on the enemy, in the situation where the state of Israel is fighting for its existence every day, where the two-state solution proposed by the United Nations in 47 was rejected, where after 67, the first thing the Arabs did as a group was get together and pass a rule that there would be no negotiation with Israel. It was Israel that left Gaza to local authority. The West Bank is run by the Palestinian Authority, and yet 11,000 rockets were sent from Gaza into Israel. So will the gentleman tell me what Israel should have done when the 12,000th rocket arrived? Should it have picked itself up and moved? That the entire Jewish people, where should they go? Should they go to Madagascar like Hitler suggested? It is a futile, foolish position. It's well-meaning. I understand the man has a strong sense of self-identity. He wants to be on the right side of history. He thinks he's being ethical, but he is a foolish, foolish position. And all of these advices, all of this advice that the state of Israel gets is suicidal. And unless you can provide some guarantee that there will not be a massacre, that there will not be a violence, that there will not be a genocide, I think the state of Israel is remarkably constrained. Remarkably constrained.
Yes. I couldn't put that more eloquently than you have. I would just add that one of the unique aspects of the Jewish people is that we have such divergent opinions, that we have, in a way, that's not to bring up a topic, but that's one of the things that Marx railed about
Well, you know the old saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Yeah, I mean, because we're very strong individuals. You're pulling ourselves up at the bootstraps and creating something. I mean, that's the model that was railed against by the Nazis, by the communists, by Marx. And as such, you have this divergent of views. But I would suggest that there are certain uniting themes, and one of them is that from a biblical standpoint, the Jewish people, Israel is an integral part of Judaism. That Zionism is a secular movement, but it also has a religious component. There is this idea that God commanded the Jewish people to take possession of that tiny little swath of land between the Jordan River and the sea so that they could be of service to God. I mean, these are principles that didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, they go back and they've been consistent for many thousands of years.
They're not an accident.
Yeah.
When God makes the covenant with Abraham, he says to Abraham that he will make his children numerous, like the stars in the sky, and then in another prophecy, like the sands on the beach, and that he will give them the land of Israel. That's essential to the covenantal relation. The gentleman before referred to the Old Testament. What he means is the Hebrew Bible, and the Hebrew Bible makes essential. The whole of the Hebrew Bible is about the connection of the Jews to the land of Israel. They leave and they wander, the patriarchs, to go to Israel. Their promise is to the land of Israel. They are redeemed from Egypt, and God says to them, I will send them back to the land of Israel that I promised them. Joshua is about the land of Israel. All the prophets of Israel either prophesy about the land of Israel or in the land of Israel, almost all in the land of Israel, with the exception of Ezekiel. The fact is that for 2,000 years, the Jewish people who have not lived as a sovereign power in the land of Israel have seen it as exile, as something missing. So to think that Zionism in the state of Israel is somehow a tangential or a minor factor added on, and that you can be Jewishly committed and that you can be biblically solvent in your imagination, sound in your imagination, is just not to understand the Bible. And that's why today the fundamentalist Christians do better than some people who want to disemancipate the Jews. You have 80 million fundamentalists in America who understand. Now, you may don't have to agree with their theology, but they understand Jews going to the land of Israel is the natural prophetic outcome of human history. Now, I don't share that view. I'm not a prophetologist. I'm not a right-wing religious person who thinks that this is the fulfillment of prophecy. But to hold that somehow this is against the Bible or a cardinal sin that the Jewish people are creating is simply to be an ignoramus.
And well, I actually am a right-wing person who believes in the redemption of Israel. But this brings us to the current question, which is why is it that let's put aside the Islamic movement and their anti-Israel stand. I get that, but the question is why is it that they have attracted so many left-wing supporters with the BDF movement and with BDS and these other anti-Israel movements. So my theory on it, and we'll get to the call in a second, I just will be brief, is that there are two aspects here, because obviously it has nothing to do with human rights. These people don't give a damn about human rights. Why, otherwise they'd be talking about Syria, or they'd be talking about Iraq, or Libya, or Sudan, or the Boko Haram. No, they care about Israel, and the reason that they focus on Israel and make these libelous charges against Israel is because Israel has two elements that they despise. Firstly, it's capitalist. Secondly, it's Jewish. It's religious. Whether or not the Israeli people are religious is irrelevant. It has a religious component. Anyway, hello, you're with us.
Oh, hi. And yes, you can confirm that as part of humanity, there's an old saying that when you put two Jewish folks together, you come away with three opinions. But I wanted to respond, though, that again, in terms of many folks quote scripture in terms of different kinds of ways. Even the word peace, piece of this, or denotation, connotation, and so forth. In the Talmud, we have these great discussions that go on. But so much and now, over all these years that from the days when Jewish folks were living in Islamic countries and were much better received in many respects than in Europe. But now, of course, we have hotheads for generations now on both sides, and in terms of then the bloodshed on both sides, and so to get it's comparable or worse than the Hatfields and the McCoys, or the bloodshed between Northern Europe, Northern Ireland, and England, but it's one of those type of situations, or India and Pakistan. We have so much bloodshed on both sides, and treat others the way you'd want to be treated yourself, but it's broken down into do unto others before they do unto you, and so we have all this type of stuff that goes on. But in many aspects, though, it really is a colonial movement, because we have folks. I mean, again, in terms of the Jewish Holocaust and the horrible bloodshed in a modern, supposedly secular country where my great grand folks came from. Very often, like if you have a child that's treated very, very badly, they will sometimes they will do the same to someone else, and there's this. I mean, just a terrible bloodshed that goes on in Israel between Israel and Palestine. But ultimately, love is the question and the answer. And then within Israel, I mean, the state of Israel. Again, the separation between Palestinians and in terms of like who can serve in the army, and then rights that are in the army, and then if somebody is a citizen of the state of Israel that is not Jewish, and then there are differences and discrimination that goes on there, and we have all these issues. Or some of our Jewish brothers and sisters who come out of Ethiopia, who are quoted in the Bible as being some of the lost tribes. You have, again, in terms of the unconscious and sometimes conscious prejudice in terms of color, the brown bag test, and how humanity is sliced and diced. You know, if you're white, you're right, you're brown.
Thank
well,
you
no, I was
much.
going to say that then in terms of who was Jewish and have to pass that test, and hey, we don't have to pass your test. We've been practicing it, and we've recorded the ancient griots. We recorded that we've been practicing Judaism, and you're going to try to decide whether we're in. So we have all these different issues that are going on. So
yeah, there's so much there. I mean, I don't know.
yeah. Where do you start with it?
Thank you very much.
But again, Jewish Voices for Peace is just as Jewish.
Yes.
But again, they
Why
have
don't
very
you
different
contact
ideas
me?
than you have. Okay.
Off the air, I'll have you on the show.
Let me just say
go
to
ahead.
that gentleman, he obviously means well. And I would like there to be a perfect world that he would like there to be. And Israel is not a perfect state. And Israel has its warts, and Israel, under enormous pressure, a state that's only been there for, from 67, 68 years, has accomplished an enormous amount, taking in immigrants and creating a modern state and having a strong economy. But it's imperfect. Yes, it's imperfect. But you show me a state that has anywhere near the problems and the issues that's more perfect.
I mean,
now that doesn't mean we shouldn't work to make it more perfect, but it doesn't mean we should dismantle it. The jump from saying that it's imperfect to saying that it shouldn't exist is a unique standard. Where else in the world does that gentleman get up and give a talk that we should dismantle any other state because it's imperfect? The United States and its history of racism, Trump's idea about Muslims, various issues in American distributive justice. Does he want to? America's also built on the remains of Native Americans and colonialism. Is he proposing that we dismantle the United States? Is he dismantling the Soviet Union with its Stalinist past, with the Gulag? Is he dismantling the state of China? He's just dismantling the state of Israel because he has a peculiarly guilty conscience because he's a Jew. And that's a good thing that he has a guilty conscience. But he should become a little bit more informed so that his intellect controls his emotions.
You know, I mean, he's obviously just choosing to put Israel under a microscope. And as you say,
it's an absurd position.
Of course it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. No human being is perfect. We're imperfect beings.
Yes.
We're created in the image of God. We're not God. Israel is imperfect. But I would suggest that given that fact and given that understanding, Israel's record is actually pretty darn good when it comes to dealing with the rights of people. It's one of the most diverse countries in the world in terms of racial and ethnic background, and that the Palestinian Arabs in Israel are, in many cases, I would suggest, better off in Israel than they are in any of the Arab and Islamic countries. They have more opportunity, there's more education, there's more business, and this whole idea that that somehow Israel needs to be examined in this way. That is something that it makes me question where they're coming from ideologically, because it's absurd. Israel's record is fantastic when it comes to human rights.
Look, Israel is like every other state, a complicated place.
Sure.
And when it's brought in people of different backgrounds, brought in 1 million people from Arab countries who had a different educational level. It brought in the Jews of Ethiopia that were essentially a Stone Age population. It brought in Jews from India that were very primitive. And you have had 1 or 2 generations, you have enormous integration now. You have intermarriage between the Arab origin Jews, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, European Jews, at the maximum that you would predict on a random sample. You have the Ethiopian Jews making enormous progress in 1 generation. It's extraordinary. You have Indian Jews who are now no longer identifiable. Jews from all over the Caucasus, Jews from Eastern Europe. So really, I think that these standards, these prophetic standards of perfection that are applied, are just inapposite. They're dubious.
Steve, we're reaching toward the end of the program.
Yes.
So I'd like you to just mention, if you'd like, some of your books where people can get them.
Well, I work on Holocaust matters mostly, but I've done a lot of other things. Right now, I'm involved in a very long process I've been working on since the early 1980s on the Holocaust as a historical phenomenon, trying to understand what was special about it, if anything, what was unlike the other kinds of tragedies in human history. After all, tragedy is no stranger to human history.
Right.
What's special about it, what the genocidal thrust of Nazism was as a unique phenomenon. So I think readers can go and find my books. They may be a little heavy for some, and they're not going to make a movie out of them, but they will, if they're interested in serious questions of discussion about the Holocaust and its nature, about its uniqueness, they'll find the work interesting, I think.
And do you want to say anything about the Jewish Studies programs?
We have a very nice program. You're all very welcome to come. We put on a lot of things at the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies at Boston University. The center has quite a number of faculty. We do public lectures. We do seminars. We do all kinds of teaching for graduates and undergraduates. We do a lot of public programming that usually is advertised in the Jewish Advocate, the Boston Globe, also on the Boston University website and the website of the Elie Wiesel Center. Everybody will be welcome. And I think if some of the people who've called tonight especially would come to the programs on Israel and hear things that may be outside of their usual range and the people they usually talk to, they might change their opinions for the better.
Well, thank you, Steve, for joining me.
My pleasure.
It's been a great talk.
Thank you.
So we shall talk amongst ourselves for a minute while the credits roll. The crew let the credits roll. We'll just...